You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.
Hey, this is Ankita.
This is Apoorva.
And HR Bandit is back. We're dusting off some carpet with our annual predictions pod. And after Apoorva's maternity leave, which urged me to take a me-ternity leave, we are back to do as we promised. 1 year ago, actually exactly on our recording date, we'd said we'd come back to tell you how we did with our predictions in 2024. So we're kicking off the 2025 season by preserving the first cardinal rule of predictions. We are going to draw a report card of how we did in 2024, but we're also bundling it with our predictions for 2025. It's been a while, Bandits. This is going to be a long one, so let's buckle up and jump straight into it. Apoorva, take it away.
Just wait right there. Before we jump into our report card for 2024, at least check in with me as to how I'm doing. But you know what? Let me tell you either way. So I welcomed my little one, my lovely daughter Anaya, in September last year, on September 18th. While you recharged zooming around the world and clocked some, I don't know what, over 100 days in travel maybe?
I did, yeah. But I'm going to ask you to share a photograph of Anaya somewhere where our bandits can see it. But Apoorva, this is a really long episode, so I'm going to ask you to really get us going.
All right, so here we go. I'll try keeping it short, but I really think the recap itself could have been a full episode of its own. So we made a total of 8 predictions exactly a year ago. The first one was an employee experience recession. I'm actually unhappy to say that we got this one right. We saw a whole host of top-down mandates, multiple RTO mandates, for example. And Gallup's data shows that in 2024, employee engagement in the United States was at its lowest level in a decade. According to Gallup, 30% of employees were engaged, while 18% were actively disengaged, which is a decline from 2020 when 36% of employees were engaged. On our second trend, we said Gen AI will swiftly move into integration with everyday work. We said AI tools will become as common as coffee machines. And now 78% of employees use AI daily. I think we got it almost right. So we are going to give it a 0.5 score. It didn't become as mainstream as we predicted, but maybe 2025 could be the year.
Our third prediction was manager squeeze, and it looks like we were spot on with that one too. Meta made multiple announcements around cutting down their managerial layers, and as per a June 2024 report from Perceptics, they said that well-being amongst managers is dangerously low, squeezed between executives who scored a 3.84 of 5 and individual contributors who scored 3.77. Managers scored a 3.69, which is lower than both. Now, this doesn't come as a surprise given, like we said, in our predictions board, managers are increasingly being asked to play multiple roles, including being the team's therapist, IT support, and RTO enforcer.
Next, Ankita predicted that we will continue to talk about RTO or return to office. And I remember I was not in agreement at the time and said, hey, it's just going to become mainstream. We won't talk about it as much. But Ankita, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I stand corrected. Walmart asked several of its remote workers to return to their head office. AT&T, JP Morgan, and Dell announced 5 days return to office starting 2025. Dell actually went a step further and also mentioned that remote workers won't be eligible for promotions. IBM asked managers to report to an office location or leave the company, and I don't think this trend is dying anytime soon, with American President Donald J. Trump being the latest enforcer to mandate all federal workers in the US to return to office or risk being fired. I then predicted that given Gen Z will outnumber millennials for the first time in 2024, companies will take steps to appeal to this generation that is more vocal, values transparency, wants flexibility, and looks up to their leaders to take a stance on important political and social issues. I would say that our prediction partly held true, where companies and research organizations continue to talk about the impact Gen Z is having on the workplace, but we didn't really see companies taking steps to address them as such. Lastly, Ankita, you had an observation that based on past trends, we will not see anything drastic or extremely innovative in the world of HR in 2024. Sadly, I think this held true for the most part. I think the only thing that comes to my mind is Novo Nordisk, which gave a target to its business leaders to reduce stress levels from 14% to under 10%, which stood out. And we actually covered it in one of our podcasts. But I hope that in 2025, we come across at least 2 HR innovations or one of its kind practices. On what will not be a trend, we will predicted that DEI will end up being on the back burner after being at the forefront since the George Floyd incident in the US, and I'm sad to report that we've been proven right. While US specific, some of the companies that have retreated from DEI in 2024 include Target, Meta, Amazon, McDonald's, Walmart, Ford, Lowe's, Harley-Davidson, John Deere, Tractor Supply, and various others. These companies have made a variety of changes to their DEI programs, including ending programs to help Black employees build meaningful careers, getting rid of DEI programs, halting some of them, and ending specific goals for achieving diversity at senior leadership levels. Over to you, Ankita.
I disagreed with Gartner and predicted that the 4-day work week was not going to be a trend. This prediction was also spot on. So I have a pretty good prediction rate. While there were some murmurs about the 4-day week here and there, it's not a trend, and at least not yet, and I don't see it happening. I secretly hope I'm wrong, but you know what? I was totally right. So that gives us a total score of 6.5 out of 8. And it's a hit rate of 81.25%, which I think is very, very impressive. So Bandits, when we predict something, there's a pretty high chance it will be true. So with that recap out of the way, let's jump straight into 2025.
All right. So we have a very high bar to meet, and here comes our first prediction. So my first prediction is that 2025 is the year when, drum rolls please, AI upskilling will be at the forefront, and something we will find in every HR team's goal sheet, which is upskilling of the company as well as HR teams themselves. I don't think this one's a surprise. AI is changing everything around us. It's on the news almost daily. And that means our jobs are changing too. We're really talking about a real need for employees to level up and how to work with AI. As per Universum's findings, only 6% of employees feel very comfortable using AI in their roles, while a Gallup study indicates that nearly 1/3 are distinctly uncomfortable. I think the implications are very clear, and organizations must act fast to bridge this divide, or they will risk falling behind their competitors. 83% of HR leaders believe that upskilling will be essential for workers to remain competitive in a job market which is shaped by AI, as per SHRM. So even for people who are looking to change their jobs, I think having know-how and not proficiency of AI will make a real difference.
Yeah, I think this is one in which we'll have. Yeah, I think this is one where we'll have Team Apoorva and Team Ankita. So Team Apoorva thinks this is a trend. Team Ankita thinks that we'll keep talking about Gen AI, and integration with work and how we all need to upskill and so on. But I think that HR will still not catch up. Like, that's my part of the trend. I think we'll keep talking about it, but we won't do enough. And I think it's important. But if you and I are still talking about Gen AI in our 2026 prediction spot, I'm going to throw my laptop out the window.
I honestly feel, at least the optimist in me feels when it comes to HR teams, that this will probably be the year where we grab this trend with both hands and actually implement multiple interventions in our organizations. However, we will of course come up with our report card and see where we stand. But what's clear is, whether this features in an HR goal sheet or not, unless we upskill ourselves on the ever-changing dynamics of AI and how it's impacting our work, we will really be left behind. So it's imperative that all of you bandits are setting aside dedicated time and making a conscious effort to do so. Personally, my AI upskilling plan has been ever evolving and all over the place, and I've been trying to play catch up, but the fact that I have a plan helps.
That is true. And maybe, Apoorva, despite me chasing you many, many times, hopefully your plan will finally be shared with all our bandits and not just be hidden somewhere. Okay. With that, I'm going to give you my first trend. Now, a lot of our trends might sound like a repeat of last year, and I think that's just the consequence of being in the field that we are. Trends take their time to play out. But my trend is that I'm spotting is DEI related. Now, Donald Trump quote on there being only two genders in the world and the consequent steps to back up the statement is a moment that I think will forever stay etched in 2025 history. IDE, EDI, DNI, call it what you want, is going to take a giant leap backwards in 2025. We've seen some of it happening in 24, Apoorva, like you rightly called out. Mali passed its first law criminalizing consensual same-sex acts. Georgia passed a new law banning any legal recognition of same-sex couples, gender recognition and information about LGBTI people in public spheres. In United States, there were 574 bills that were directed towards the LGBTQ company. And I think in general, there will be a lot of uncertainty in this space. Now, of course, it isn't all doom and gloom. Like, there are countries that have legalized same-sex marriage, but I think you and I will have to do a big job this year in tracking what's changing, what's not changing, coming up with our recommendations. So this is definitely a space to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trend I don't like, but I do agree with the prediction. And like you called out, there are also political reasons which are fueling this trend. A record 70 countries went to elections in 2024, and major nations like US, France, Austria, Netherlands, and few others have elected right-leaning political parties. So we now see companies taking steps to be on the right side of an increasingly right-leaning political landscape. And that's why we are seeing these shifts. I'm really keen to see how many CEOs will have it in them to continue treading the tougher path of sticking with their DEI goals. But I'm at a loss of what HR teams can really do if they see their own CEO deprioritizing DEI. Ankita, what do you think we could do differently as HR folks in the year?
I think one part of it is like really keeping a very close, watchful eye of the geopolitical situation across the world, right? Because that'll give us leading indicators on what's changing. And then like sometimes it isn't deprioritizing DEI as much as changing the external appearance so that you're not caught between any legal and political crossfires. But to your point, like if the CEO decides to deprioritize it, we'll have to do like little undercover operations to ensure that it doesn't die. Apart from that, I'm not sure what can happen. But, because we're talking about the whole diversity and inclusion thing, I was at a talk yesterday, coincidentally, where someone from Accenture actually said that it is in our DNA, and no matter how, and there's been years and years of evidence how there are a lot of benefits to have an increasingly diverse and inclusive workforce. So I think if something is embedded in your DNA, in your culture, it's going to be hard to wrench that away. So you could change the language, you could reduce the dedicated diversity and inclusion employees you have. But I think that's where we need to be, where it's just the way you are, and you don't need specific HR teams dedicated to, increasing diversity and inclusion in your organization. I don't know how useful that was, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I believe what gets measured gets delivered at the end of the day, but I do get what you're saying. We don't need a goal to do the right thing. And I think that's the mantra we can all adopt when it comes to DEI. Okay, so moving on, here's my second one. And this one is soft quitting. So we've all likely heard about quiet quitting, where employees actively stop contributing beyond their job description. Soft quitting is more subtle, and it would manifest in behavior changes which can go unnoticed even by some of the most attentive managers. So for example, imagine someone who used to be really enthusiastic contributor and now responds with half-hearted answers. Or someone who once took pride in solving problems now waits for others to take charge. With more individuals, particularly from younger generations, pushing back against the always-on culture, it's possible that this rejection of work-related pressures could manifest as soft quitting in the workplace, where employees still technically remain in their roles, but they engage emotionally, contributing only the bare minimum. The problem is only getting worse, and Wall Street Journal recently reported that the number of Americans wanting to switch jobs has hit a 10-year high. However, the job market isn't conducive to employees shifting jobs right now. There aren't as many jobs as there used to be. So I think this will further increase soft quitting, where employees want to probably want to change their organization, but they're not able to. and it will lead to further lowering of engagement levels. Any observations from you, Ankita?
This one I agree with you on, like, wholeheartedly. And like I've written about it on my blog when I was predicting the 2025 trends. I think fatigue has a huge part to play in it. I think we've got so many top-down mandates. The world is increasingly changing. There's just a lot going on that employees are kind of tired. Like even people I was speaking to over informal conversations, they're just like, okay, this is the year of recovery. Hopefully there won't be any more change. We are fatigued, and that does translate, I think, in some ways to these symptoms that you called out, like not being extremely proactive in solving problems. We'll do our core job and we'll probably do it well enough, but we're not going to go out of our way to try and solve any company or team-wide problems. So yeah, I'm on 100% agreement.
The one thing I do want to add to this trend is what we as HR teams can do. And I feel even though the job market is not as lucrative for employees as it used to be, our best employees will likely not find it as difficult to land a job externally. And hence, I think we need to up our ante on retaining our top performers. I know we can no longer rely on a peanut butter approach to retaining our top employees. We likely have to figure out what really works for. We have to be more individualistic in our approach there, work with our leaders, specifically identify what do our top performers value and help them achieve that, in addition to addressing fatigue wherever it's possible. But I think that's one key takeaway I would like HR teams to take from this trend.
Yeah, I think that, and to your point of addressing fatigue, we've always said, like change is inevitable, the rate of change of speed in the world is massively increasing. But so much of it is artificial urgency. So I think as HR leaders in the organizations, we can buffer, like we can try and put a metric to how much change is too much change, because there is such a thing as change fatigue. Human beings are built a certain way and we can buffer some change at a certain level. I don't think we should shove everything down the organization's throat, and that is where I think we have a role to play, to say, when are our employees too exhausted, and instead of pushing them further and further, when can we work with our business to not necessarily keep changing everything? You could do like tiny changes and they'll also probably be more effective. Okay, with that, I am going to give you my second trend, and I'm calling this trend the rise of incivility. Now, most HR trend articles that I have been scanning on the internet were more of the same, right? They covered the topics that we've talked of, and I was looking for a definition of a type of behavior that I have been seeing on the rise. And SHRM really got it right, and they've captured it better than I can. So I'm going to just copy it from their report. Of course, Bandits, like always, everything is going to be linked in our show notes, so you can go in there for more information. Now, here's what the article says. If the world seems less courteous or empathetic lately, you're not imagining it. SHRM launched its civility campaign in 2024 precisely because of rising concerns about an incivility in society that's bubbling up and overflowing into the workforce. The SHRM Q3 2024 Civility Index survey of more than 1,600 US workers conducted the survey from August 24 to September 4, 2024. And these concerns were well-founded. Now, workers said that they experience 190 million acts of incivility per day, which is a lot. And I don't know if I can totally believe those numbers. But they said that 58% of these happen at the workplace. And the biggest drivers of incivility were political viewpoints, disagreement on social issues, generational gaps, racial or ethnic differences, and the direction of the US society. Now, this excerpt is only for the US, but I do think we are observing this trend globally. Again, I'm going to tie it to the whole geopolitical situation and elections, which obviously lead to a divided view. But I do think we're going to see massive rises of incivility at the workplace. And obviously, being the custodians of culture and all things nice, we will have a role to play.
This one is really interesting, and until you put those numbers into perspective, I had honestly not thought about how prevalent incivility at work might be, and those numbers that you just quoted I was pretty concerned when I heard them. I also think the social media echo chambers, which have increased polarization, is also fueling this trend. We have people who are more vocal now, and at the same time, we don't listen or are not willing to listen to opposing points of view, which is increasing this further. And I think for us, like, respect is the bare minimum a person would expect at their workplace, and we really have to build an environment and maintain an environment and a culture where we don't see employees at work getting impacted to lack of respect from others because they have different views. And I think workplace code of conduct and stuff like that is important, but we also would need leaders to model those respectful behaviors at the workplace as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think with incivility, there isn't a very clear boundary you can draw. Like, there are small microaggressions which are not essentially fireable offenses or, something that we can act as easily on. So it is going to be tricky. I was listening to a finance podcast and they said this in a different context, but it does apply here too. They said, like, for a while, the cool thing for organizations, especially big tech, was to be empathetic and, showing a lot of traits where the employee felt wanted. And now suddenly there has been a trend of masculinity where it is cool to be more aggressive, and so on. So I think, again, this is something we will through the year to see where it goes, but I would say it's very much a trend. Okay, Apoorva?
Right. Yes, so I'm now going to switch to what's not going to be a trend, and I got a mandate from Ankita that the word AI shouldn't appear in it. So here we go. I think, so in the past we've spoken, or we have at least come across hyper-personalization of employee experience, and I personally think it's not going to be a trend anymore. Hyper-personalized employee experience typically would mean that all our employee facing processes, starting from onboarding until exit, are curated specifically at an individual level. So, for example, if I am a top performer with a certain tenure, my experience of rewards could be very different from a top performer but who's not as tenured, or a low performer for sure. So I remember a few years back there was a lot of discussion around how each HR process needs to be a lot more personalized, a lot more curated towards a specific employee, especially when we talk about, say, an engagement survey and the initiatives that we roll out as a result. However, I have seen little in the way of companies actually implementing them. Our rewards, our benefits are still pretty much standard across the organization. We don't come across a basket of benefits that employees can choose from, for example. So I feel this is not going to be a trend anytime soon, and definitely not in 2025. And I'm cheating here because I'm going to use the word AI, Ankita, but I had thought that AI would actually help solve this problem, but looks like we're still not being able to figure out how we can leverage AI in more upstream work. We are still focused more on downstream work, which is like how we can improve efficiency and stuff like that. But I think this will come a few years down the line.
I agree. I think if DEI is dying a death, and so is hyper. I actually haven't heard about hyper personalization for a while now. It seemed to have disappeared from conversation. The only personalization we're seeing now is all process and policies per the CEO of the company. So, okay, I agree with that, not a trend, and I'm going to give you mine because we've always done not a trends. Work-life balance is not going to be a trend this year. Now, Bandits, don't hate me, but I genuinely think we can want it all we want, but the term year of efficiency is an oxymoron to work-life balance. So I can confidently say that we will be pushed to do more, we will be pushed to be more efficient, especially given the word that shall not be mentioned anymore on this podcast. But I think as a rule, it's going to be more of a squeeze the orange harder year than us seeing anything happening in the space of better work-life balance.
Yeah, I think so too. And even when we're talking about efficiency, we are achieving efficiency by asking people the benefits of those efficiency are not being realized by improving work-life balance, at least not yet. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, okay. So, Bandits, that's our prediction for 2025. We made 6 of them. As always, we will come back a year later to do our report card and make our next set of predictions. Before we go, a big shout out to all listeners who survived the 2024's employee experience recession. We will resume regular programming. We are glad to be back. We're going to tell you what's happening in the world of work every single month. And with that, Bandits, I'm so glad you're here for our first episode of the year. On behalf of NHRDN and Apoorva, this is Ankita and we are out.
You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.